Hello everyone. Today I'm going to tell you some stories about cheating. The first story. The rain in Paris that Tuesday was the kind that seeped into your bones, cold and relentless. It mirrored the chill that had taken root in Eleanor's heart. She watched it streak down the window of the plush suite, blurring the already dazzling lights of the city into a watercolor mess. She was supposed to be enjoying the view, the culmination of years of ambition, of meticulously cultivated relationships. She was supposed to be celebrating. After all, she was in the Hotel Plaza Athénée, a guest of the President of France, Emmanuel Moreau, and tonight was their anniversary, except, anniversaries were supposed to be happy. This felt like a dirge. Just 6 months ago, she'd been Eleanor Harding, a museum curator from Chicago, married to David, a loving, predictable architect. Their life was a comfortable mosaic of weekend farmers' markets, Sunday brunches, and quiet evenings curled up with books. It was a life she thought she loved, a life she'd actively chosen. Then came the museum gala, a prestigious affair where she'd met Monsieur le Président. Moreau was charismatic, a whirlwind of tailored suits, sharp wit, and an undeniable intensity. He'd zeroed in on her, drawn by her genuine passion for art, her sharp intellect. He'd asked about her favorite impressionist, about the nuances of Monet's brushstrokes, about her dreams. David, at the same gala, had asked if they were serving mini quiches. The attraction was immediate, undeniable, and utterly terrifying. He was the President of France. She was a married woman. But the spark was there, burning brightly in the space between them. What followed was a dizzying dance of stolen moments, clandestine phone calls, and secret meetings. He courted her with private tours of the Louvre, whispered declarations in dimly lit cafes, and a passion that made her feel both alive and profoundly guilty. He spoke of her intellect, her spirit, the way she saw the world. He saw her. He saw all the things David, bless his heart, simply didn't. David had always loved her, that much was certain. But he loved the version of Eleanor he knew, the woman who baked him cookies and planned their vacations. He hadn't noticed her quiet discontent, the yearning for something more, something bigger, and Emmanuel, with his power, his sophistication, and his devastating gaze, had offered her that. Or at least, the illusion of it. Now, 6 months after that fateful gala, she was here, in this lavish suite, waiting for him. The rain continued to fall, a persistent drumming against the glass. She imagined David, back in Chicago, probably sketching blueprints or meticulously organizing his sock drawer. The thought brought a fresh wave of guilt. The truth was, she loved David. She loved his kindness, his steadfastness, the way he always knew how to make her laugh. But she was also intoxicated with Emmanuel, with the thrill of the forbidden, with the feeling of being seen, truly seen, by a man of such power. A knock on the door startled her. She smoothed her dress, a stunning emerald gown he'd personally selected, and took a deep breath. He entered, radiating an aura of command even in his casual attire. He crossed the room, taking her in his arms. His kiss was passionate, demanding, a temporary anesthetic for the swirling turmoil inside her. "Eleanor," he murmured against her hair. 6 months. It feels like a lifetime. She pulled back slightly, searching his eyes. "Emmanuel," she began, the words catching in her throat, I need to tell you something." He frowned, sensing the shift in her mood. "What is it, Sherry?" She hesitated. The words felt like treachery, like a confession she couldn't quite bring herself to make. I'm not sure this is right," she finally whispered, the sound barely audible above the rain. He stepped back, his expression hardening. The President of France, accustomed to getting his way, was rarely denied. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I miss David. I miss my life. I miss normalcy." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken tension. The rain seemed to intensify, mirroring the storm brewing within them both. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze piercing. "Normalcy," he repeated, the word laced with disdain. "You want to go back to your normal life? After everything we've shared?" She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I do. I made a mistake, Emmanuel. A terrible mistake. This isn't me. I don't belong here." He said nothing, his face a mask of cold indifference. This wasn't the reaction she expected. She braced herself for anger, for a barrage of arguments, but instead, he simply turned and walked towards the door. "Goodbye, Eleanor," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Enjoy your normalcy." And with that, he was gone, leaving her alone in the opulent suite, the rain still falling, the city lights blurring through her tears. Eleanor stayed in Paris for another day, a day spent wandering aimlessly through the city, trying to make sense of the whirlwind she'd created. She booked a flight back to Chicago, a flight back to David, a flight back to the life she'd so carelessly thrown away. She knew she'd hurt him profoundly. Rebuilding the trust, if he was willing to even try, would be a monumental task. But as the plane soared above the clouds, leaving Paris behind, Eleanor felt a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could salvage what she had. Maybe the normalcy she craved wasn't so bad after all. Maybe, amidst the quiet routine, she could find the Eleanor she had lost, the woman who loved her husband, the woman who belonged. The woman who wasn't defined by power, passion, or the fleeting attention of the President of France. Just Eleanor. And maybe, that was enough. The second story. The scent of lavender and regret hung heavy in the opulent air of the apartment. It was Marie's favorite fragrance, usually a comforting balm after a long day advising art collectors. Tonight, however, it felt like a shroud. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking the glittering cityscape, a glass of chilled Sancerre sweating in her trembling hand. Across the room, Jean-Pierre, her husband, a celebrated architect, hummed a Bach cello suite as he meticulously arranged blueprints on the sleek, minimalist table he'd designed himself. The sound was normally a soothing counterpoint to the city's hum, but tonight it felt like a ticking bomb, counting down to some inevitable detonation. Marie and Jean-Pierre had built a life together, brick by curated brick, with the same precision and artistry he brought to his buildings. They were a power couple, envied and admired in their Parisian circles. But beneath the polished surface, cracks had begun to appear, hairline fractures of discontent that she had ignored, hoping they would simply disappear. Then came Julian Thorne, the charismatic and impeccably dressed ambassador of the Global Commerce Bank. He was everything Jean-Pierre wasn't: brash, adventurous, and utterly captivated by her. He'd approached her at a gallery opening, complimenting her knowledge of the obscure Renaissance painter they both admired. He'd sought her out at subsequent events, his eyes lingering a little too long, his words laced with a seductive promise that she'd known it was wrong, the thrill simmering beneath her skin a dangerous intoxicant. Jean-Pierre, absorbed in his work, his world shrinking to the scale of his blueprints, hadn't noticed the subtle shift in her demeanor, the stolen glances, the hushed phone calls. The affair had begun slowly, a series of lunches, then dinners, then late-night meetings under the guise of discussing potential art investments for the bank. Julien was a master manipulator, flattering her intelligence, making her feel seen and desired in a way Jean-Pierre no longer seemed to. He was a whirlwind of passion and luxury, a stark contrast to her predictable, albeit comfortable, life. The culmination had been a weekend in Rome, a blur of Romanesque architecture, expensive wine, and raw, unadulterated desire. The guilt had settled in like a stone the moment she boarded the flight back to Paris, crushing her ribs with its weight. Now, as she watched Jean-Pierre meticulously arranging his blueprints, the memory of Julien's touch burned on her skin. The lies she was living were suffocating her. She had to tell him. "Jean-Pierre," she began, her voice a shaky whisper that he looked up, a gentle smile gracing his lips. "Yes, chérie?" The sight of his trusting face was a punch to the gut. She couldn't do it. Not now. Not here. I'm just tired," she mumbled, averting her gaze. "Long day." He nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. He came over to her, took her hand, and kissed her forehead. "Go to bed. I'll join you in a bit." As she walked towards the bedroom, the lavender scent seemed to mock her, turning from a comfort into a suffocating miasma. She knew she was trapped. She was caught between the stability and familiarity of her marriage and the intoxicating allure of Julien. Later that night, as Jean-Pierre slept soundly beside her, she stared at the ceiling, the city lights painting shifting patterns on the plaster. The truth felt like a shard of glass lodged in her throat, impossible to swallow. She knew that eventually, it would have to come out. The question was, what would be left of their beautiful, carefully constructed life when it did? And would either of them ever truly forgive her, or herself, for the betrayal that had taken root in the hallowed ground of their marriage? The answer, like the city lights outside, flickered uncertainly in the darkness. The third story, the silence in the kitchen was thick, a suffocating blanket that had been growing heavier each day. Sarah stared at the chipped ceramic mug in her hands, the lukewarm coffee doing little to warm the chill that had settled in her bones. Across the table, Mark fiddled with his phone, his thumb tracing the screen, his eyes avoiding hers. They had built a life, brick by brick. A cozy cottage in the suburbs, 2 well-behaved kids, a comfortable rhythm that hummed with familiarity. But now, that rhythm was broken, shattered into discordant notes by a single, devastating revelation. He had cheated. Not with a colleague, not with a friend, but with Elena Petrova, the Olympic champion gymnast, Elena Petrova. The name echoed in Sarah's head, a constant, mocking reminder of her own ordinariness. She was a teacher, a mother, a wife. Elena was a goddess, a sculpted vision of strength and grace, worshipped on magazine covers and plastered across billboards. How could she compete with that? "I need to tell the kids," Sarah finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. Mark looked up, his face drawn and pale. "Not yet, Sarah. Please. Let me try to fix this." Fix this? How could he possibly fix this? The image of Elena, poised mid-air, a perfect arc against the Olympic Stadium lights, flashed in Sarah's mind. It was a stark contrast to the image of herself, tired and worn, scrubbing crayon marks off the kitchen table. "Fix what, Mark?" she asked, the bitterness creeping into her voice. "The lies? The betrayal? The fact that you apparently prefer a human pretzel to your wife?" He flinched. "It wasn't like that, Sarah. It just happened." "Happened?" she repeated, incredulous. "Did you just accidentally trip and fall into an Olympic champion's arms?" He didn't answer, the silence a damning admission. The truth was, Sarah had noticed the subtle changes in Mark. The late nights at the office that stretched into the early hours, the distracted air, the sudden interest in gymnastics documentaries. She had dismissed them as stress, as midlife crisis, anything but the horrifying reality. In the days that followed, Sarah went through the motions. She taught her classes, packed lunches, and read bedtime stories, all while a gnawing pain ate at her from the inside. She watched Mark desperately trying to reclaim his place in their family, cooking dinners, attending soccer practice, showering her with lukewarm affection. But the trust was gone, shattered like a dropped vase, the pieces too small and sharp to be put back together. One evening, Sarah found a news article online. It was about Elena Petrova's struggles with the pressure of maintaining her image and the loneliness that came with fame. There was even a mention of a brief, ill-advised relationship that had ended amicably. Reading it, Sarah felt a flicker of something unexpected. Pity. Elena, the untouchable goddess, was just a woman, vulnerable and imperfect. Just like Sarah herself, the realization didn't magically erase the pain, but it shifted something within her. She began to see that Mark's affair wasn't just about her shortcomings, or Elena's perfection. It was about Mark's own insecurities, his need for validation, his misguided pursuit of something he thought he was missing. Sarah knew she couldn't stay in this limbo forever. She needed to decide. Could she forgive? Could she rebuild? Or was the damage irreparable? One crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah sat Mark down. "I need to know," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "Are you still in love with her?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and regret. "No, Sarah. I made a mistake. A terrible one. I love you. I love our family." Sarah looked deep into his eyes, searching for the truth. She saw remorse, but she also saw a glimmer of the man she had fallen in love with. The decision wasn't easy, but she made it. "We have a lot of work to do, Mark," she said, her voice firm. "A lot of rebuilding. But I'm willing to try, if you are." It wouldn't be the same. The scar of his betrayal would always be there. But perhaps, just perhaps, they could build something new, something stronger, something forged in the fires of forgiveness and understanding. The road would be long and arduous, but for the sake of their children, and for the hope of a future together, they were willing to take the first step. The Olympic champion might have won a gold medal, but Sarah was determined to win back her life. And that, she realized, was a victory worth fighting for. The fourth story, the humid Georgia air hung heavy, thick with the scent of honeysuckle and regret. Clara stirred the sweet tea with excessive force, the clinking of the spoon against the glass a sharp counterpoint to the cicadas' drone outside. Across the worn formica table, Mark read the newspaper, oblivious, or so she thought, that they'd been married 15 years, a comfortable, predictable life built on shared values and a quiet affection. Mark, a high school history teacher, found joy in his students and the rhythmic turning of seasons. Clara, a librarian, loved the hushed reverence of the stacks and the stories they held. Their love wasn't fireworks, but a steady, warm hearth, the kind that keeps you safe in the long winter nights, except, this felt like a long winter night, and Clara had sought a different kind of warmth. It had started innocently enough. Tom, the new neighbor, a landscape architect with a smile that could melt asphalt, had asked to borrow a trowel. Then came conversations over the fence, admiring her prize-winning roses, offering unsolicited gardening tips. He was charming, attentive, everything Mark wasn't, or perhaps everything Mark had stopped being. Mark was tired. He came home exhausted, buried under stacks of papers to grade, his mind already on the next day's lesson. He'd stopped noticing the small things, the new dress she'd bought, the way she'd changed her hair. He'd become a comforting, predictable presence, but a distant one. Tom, on the other hand, noticed everything. He complimented her cooking, remembered her birthday, even left a single rose on her doorstep after a particularly harsh argument with Mark. He made her feel seen. The affair had been a slow burn, escalating from lingering glances to stolen touches to whispered promises. The guilt gnawed at her, a constant, dull ache. She'd justified it in her head. She told herself it was a cry for help, a desperate attempt to shake Mark awake, to remind him that she was still a woman, still desirable. One sweltering afternoon, while Mark was at summer school, Tom had been planting hydrangeas in his yard. He'd called her over, needing help holding a heavy bush. The sun was beating down, their hands brushed, and then, everything changed. One minute they were holding a plant, the next they were in his cool, shaded living room, lost in a whirlwind of passion. The memory, even now, 2 weeks later, sent a shiver down her spine, a mixture of shame and exhilaration. Now, the guilt was a monster, a living thing that threatened to consume her. She couldn't look Mark in the eye. Every kiss felt like a betrayal, every shared laugh a mockery. She considered confessing, but the thought of shattering their life, of seeing the hurt and disbelief in Mark's eyes, paralyzed her. "Clara," Mark finally said, lowering the newspaper. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Are you all right? You seem distant." She froze, the sweet tea suddenly tasting bitter. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice tight. "Just tired." He studied her for a moment, his brow furrowed. He knew her too well. "Is it work?" "Yes," she said quickly, grasping at the excuse. "The library is understaffed this summer." He nodded slowly, a flicker of concern in his eyes. He reached across the table and took her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I know I haven't been the best husband lately. Summer school takes it out of me. But I'll try to do better. I promise." His words were a knife twisting in her gut. The love in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice, made her feel even more wretched. He was trying. He was reaching out. And she, the woman who had vowed to love and cherish him, was betraying him in the worst possible way. That night, Clara lay awake beside Mark, listening to his steady breathing. The guilt was a suffocating weight, pressing down on her chest. She knew she couldn't live like this, trapped in a web of lies and deceit. The next morning, she saw Tom watering his hydrangeas. He caught her eye and smiled, a knowing, expectant smile. Clara took a deep breath and walked towards him, her heart pounding in her chest. Tom, she said, her voice trembling, we need to talk. The honeysuckle still bloomed, the cicadas still sang, but for Clara, the air no longer tasted of sweetness. It tasted of consequences, of choices made, and of a future she could no longer predict. The long winter night had only just begun.